Okay, good morning. Okay, now for the resolution of any outstanding problems. Well, actually, no, I take that back. What we're going to do is go quite slowly through Russell's knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description and the details of what he does. This hooks back to many of the main themes of the class, and in some ways Russell has been striking me that Russell is really the hero of theory, meaning the way I see it. He gets, on all the fundamental points, Russell seems to me to be completely correct, despite a century of going off the tracks in between then and now. So I'll start out by looking at what Russell says in this article about acquaintance with the self. It is one of these things like Putnam and brains in a vat. It's a topic that is right next to many basic philosophical questions, and so it's kind of interesting to see what he says about that. Then we'll look at the main themes, just review some of the main ideas that we've already looked at before in the class. So do use this as a springboard to raise questions of any kind at all that you like. Okay, that's the plan. Acquaintance. I'm acquainted with an object when I have a direct, most of today's session consists of direct quotes from the paper, okay? I'll say I'm acquainted with an object when I have a direct cognitive relation to that object. That is, when I'm directly acquainted with the object, directly aware of the object itself. And when I speak of a cognitive relation here, I do not mean the sort of relation which constitutes judgment. So this is not propositional. This is something below the level of the proposition. Remember when we were talking about pollution and multiple object tracking? I said here you've got a kind of connect between you and the world when you're just staring at the object, when you're just immersing yourself in the object that doesn't involve making judgments about it. The sort which constitutes presentation. Presentation has a significant life in the literature since Russell. For example, my distinguished colleague John Searle talks about perception as not representing the world, but as presenting it. And a lot of people use that kind of talk. Now, it's really instructive to just try and think through crudely what's going on when people talk about perception, presenting the world rather than representing it. Representation is the kind of thing that a newspaper does. In a newspaper, you read all the text, some event is being represented to you. Yep. Is it like that in perception? Are you, as it were, getting a whole bunch of text that is just telling you what's going on out there? Or there are a whole bunch of people on chairs and so on around me? Or is there something that's somehow more direct than that? Well, it's absolutely compelling that there is something more direct than that. And the interesting thing is when you try and articulate what the sense is in which it's more direct than just getting a representation of the world around you, what you find yourself wanting to say is that the actual sensory characteristics, the shapes, the colors, the smells, the tastes, they're actually there in your perception. They're not just being represented. Your perception actually has the color. I once heard someone quote Wilfrid Sellars as saying the following. I've never been able to find this quote, but it's such a wonderful remark. In vision, we think about the colors in color. Right? So you don't just think about the colors the way you could, a newspaper could describe lots of colors. In vision, you're representing them in color. And that's very intuitive, actually, right? But it's also a kind of daft thing to say, because it means that the colors are there in your vision, independently of any representation you might have of them. You see what I mean? The color itself is there in the perception, not merely a representation of it. Another way to think about this is, have you guys ever come across phosphenes? Phosphenes? Phosphenes are when your your visual nerves are stimulated, but not by light. So if so, you can do that, don't do it right now, but you can try this at home if you like, just pushing your eyeball. I've never had the courage to do it myself, but I'm reliably assured that if you push gently in your eyeball, for God's sake, don't do it now. Then you get kind of shooting stars and stuff like that. It's kind of psychedelic. There are a lot of attempts to. Actually, I'm not trying to encourage you. There are a lot of serious attempts to stimulate the visual nerve by putting in electrical impulses directly to the nerve, with the idea being that for people who are blind, this really might help. This might give you a way of seeing if you could get the electricity or the electrical input to stimulate the nerve directly. Now, suppose you've got someone who's got a phosphene. So, say they've got a rectangular yellow object in their field that's moving. Is that thing literally yellow or not? Suppose the subject says, "Yeah, I've got a phosphene. It's right there. It's," or you push your eye and you've got a shooting star and it's, let's say, bright red. Is there something red there? I mean, on the one hand, I have two reactions to this myself. That on the one hand, you could search through all of space and time, and there's no yellow rectangular thing that's moving around. Yeah? But on the other hand, it seems like a complete denial of reality to say that there's something yellow and rectangular there. I mean, there it is, shimmering, vibrant. If someone says there's no such thing, that's just to deny the plainest fact. Yep.
So you have visual experience with something that is slow, describe it over pictures that you see.
That's right. That's what you're doing. There's something yellow and rectangular that you're seeing. There's no object of reality. So there is an object, but it's not an object of reality.
I mean, you're having a visual experience. Whatever it is, some sort of combination of things that come together to give you that visual experience. There's no real, it's not the same experience that I would get, for instance, if I were to look at a yellow board, or a whiteboard. Where there's a whiteboard, and I have visual experience of the whiteboard, and there's an actual object of reality that comes with that visual experience.
Right, so there's certainly a distinction, right? There's certainly something right when we say there's nothing real there. And I think the way we talk about these kind of cases in everyday life is in a kind of Meinongian way. We say it's there, all right, but it's not really there. It subsists, but it doesn't exist. Something like that. That's actually the way we talk. You know, I'm seeing things, you say, things that are not really there. They're there, but they're not really there. That's how we talk. But my point is just, it is very hard to do justice to what's going on here without saying, I'm using the word correctly and literally when I say there's something yellow here. Yeah? I mean, it's not, people tend to say, well, it looks yellow, but it doesn't just look yellow. It's not like it might be purple. It's really yellow. You know, it's vibrantly, unmistakably yellow. Yeah? So when you're describing a phosphene, it's very hard to describe it without using words like yellow, rectangular, moving. Moving is the one that really gets people. Can there really be something moving there? But we're using English literally when we describe it like that. We're not saying, oh, well, it's kind of metaphorically yellow. You know, the way you might say of someone cowardly, you're yellow. You know, that's not what's going on. This is a plain, literal use of language. Yeah? Yeah?
It's not an object. I mean, we could say it's a quality describing a character rather than describing it. It doesn't have an objective presentation. It's presented as a quality, something character.
Okay. It's presented as a quality, but it's not just a free-floating quality. There's something that has the quality, and it's the same thing that is rectangular and moving. You know, there are many properties here all being instantiated together. I want to just leave this as a homework. Actually, yeah, carry on. I do want to leave this. I don't want to try and solve this right now, but yeah, carry on.
So we want to say that there's a material substance that's out there that yellow is inherent.
That would be too strong. We don't want. I mean, nobody in their senses would want to say there's a material thing there. You know, there you would go too far. Yeah. My point is, what I really want to get over is you couldn't get at it. You couldn't describe what was going on here without using the word yellow, square, moving literally. and applying them to your experience. Yeah. Now, I think that's an extremely puzzling case, and I think it's much harder. There isn't. I don't think there's a quick fix, and I think you bring up my point when you that's why it's easy to trip people. It's really much harder than it looks. This, yeah. Yep.
What constitutes something being out there?
Out there, yeah. That's a natural question. It's in here, but it's not out there. Yeah, my point is, whatever it is, it's yellow, and it's moving, and it's rectangular. Yeah, and I agree. Of course, you want some distinction like that, but the key thing is you want to literally apply the word yellow to it, and nothing short of that is going to do justice to your experience. Yeah, yellow in here, fair enough, whatever qualification you want, but yellow, one way or another. Yeah, and not in some figurative sense. Yep. That may well be right. There is something learned that the phosphine does not really exist, sure. But still in all, you're getting it. When the researcher puts the impulse down the wires, you would be lying if you said, well, there's nothing there, nothing yellow. Of course there's something yellow there. Yeah. The experimenter relies on you giving that a sincere report. So the thing is, I think the thing about the phosphine is extremely puzzling, but if you ask about your current experience, as you look around the room, as you look at the screen, say, is whiteness there in your experience? And whiteness seems to characterize your experience itself. Yeah. Only in the case of ordinary perception, ordinary seeing of things, there are the white rectangular moving objects. Yeah. These things are really there. So if you're characterizing what's presented in experience, what you're actually characterizing are the material objects themselves, the things you're seeing. So it's not that you've got a representation of them. The things themselves actually characterize your experience. Yeah? That's the pool of saying presentation. So it's not a way of saying judgment at all, or representation, or intentionality. With all due respect to my distinguished colleagues, this is not a kind of intentionality. This is the things themselves, not a representation of them, not some intentional thing directed at them. So what's presented in experience is the thing, the yellow square, the yellow rectangular moving object, the real thing. And what Russell's calling acquaintance is just that, the converse of the relation of subject and object, which constitutes presentation. Right? So it's that connect between you and the multicolored world. So forget about thinking about the colors in color. You're not thinking about the colors at all in color. You're actually getting the colors of external objects as constituents of your experience. That's what you're reporting ordinarily. There are these residual puzzles about phosphine that are kind of very diverting, but who cares about phosphines anyway? You see what I mean? I mean, perception and reference, that's really important. Right? Okay, well, I'll take that as read. And the phosphines we can leave as a side issue. An interesting side issue, but a side issue. Yeah?
So on this point, if it's not things that you have, it's not that you have representation that you think or that you yourself how do you account for people having different views, or if this is an external thing that's not dependent on our internal
Okay.
subjectivity, how can we account for people who have different perspectives on the same external object?
Very good. I absolutely agree. The problem of modes of presentation, or Phrygian senses, yeah, really comes up here. Yeah, come on to that in a second. Okay, but that's really important. Yeah, it mustn't be just that it's the thing. You've got to have some room for the idea of a way of being given the thing. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it would be far too imperialist to say we see it right and the cats see it all wrong. Yeah, we want to allow that reality has many mansions, and the cats are just seeing different aspects of reality than we are. Yeah, I mean, there are many dramatic examples of that. These black birds, you know, there are these kind of birds that look very uniform in colour, that when you flood them with ultraviolet light, they turn out to have very distinctive bright patterns on them. And then you look at what wavelengths those birds are responsive to. They're responsive to those very wavelengths. You see what I mean? There are many dramatic examples of animals seeing different stuff than we see. Okay, yeah.
So, first, just with regards to the word intentionality.
Intentionality, yes.
So, what you're conceiving of here with this presentation, this is not a way, this is not any form of intentionality.
That's right. It's not a form of intentionality.
I wasn't sure about that yesterday. Sorry, guys. And then, so the other thing is, with the example of the bird and colors that we can't see, so that's what you would say also about Nagel's bat? The bats getting onto...
Different sectors of reality than we are.
But they're
Exactly.
but still in this presentational...
Exactly. That's right. That's exactly the idea. So what we're missing with the bat is not something internal to its head, it's something external to its head. If you think of those apparently uniformly coloured birds, they're getting onto some aspects of the environment that we can't get onto. Yeah.
Just following up on what Melissa said, it seems to me that we might be making from, in the case of the presentation, going from presentation quality to intentionality, where we might be, there seems to be a metaphysical shift there between being presented photons in my brain and being presented objects.
Yeah.
You're saying I'm
Okay.
seeing the world the way it is.
Okay. All right. I don't want to be too confusing here. There's actually a sense in which at the end I do want to back off and say there is a kind of intentionality here. But the thing is, the way that intentionality is used in the literature is always there is a kind of propositional state. It's believing that, hoping that, and then perceiving that P, you know, what goes in there as a proposition. And then perceiving that P or presenting that P in perception is supposed to be a special form of this thinking that P, only in this case it's a very brightly coloured one. And that, I think, really doesn't make an ounce of sense when you think about what the intuitive idea is. So that's the idea of intentionality I really want to reject. But it seems to me there's actually a more primitive notion of intentionality that just has to do with goal-orientedness. If I've got a rifle and I'm training it around, then you can say, have I locked onto someone? Am I really going after someone here? And there can be a kind of intentionality here that just has to do with locking onto an object and going after it. So if you've got this relation of acquaintance, then I can resist thinking about it as a kind of thinking that P, or even a brightly coloured thinking that P. But say if I've got acquaintance, it's kind of like having my gun sight on something. I've locked onto it, and now I can act with respect to it. So in that very primitive kind of, I've got an object here, and now I can do stuff with respect to it, in that sense it's intentional. But that's not the way the term is usually used in the literature, I think. Okay. So here's Russell shaping up to consider acquaintance with the self. Is that intuitively clear what acquaintance is so far? What the picture, whether you agree or not? It's kind of a mind-bending picture. You haven't really understood it unless you're a bit startled by it. Yep.
You said it's the converse of the
Or presentation, yeah.
I don't have that quite clear.
Okay, well, suppose I'm being presented with you, right? So your coloration, shape, clothing, and so on, they're all right there in my experience. So to characterize the experience, I have to characterize that. Yeah, perfectly literally using the words for those characteristics. Yeah, that's how I characterize my experience. So that's you presented to me. Acquaintance is just putting it the other way around. I can say you are presented to me, or I can say I am acquainted with you. It's just the same thing. Yeah. He's just saying, to put it the other way around, I'm acquainted with you. Yeah. Now, whether it's possible to be aware of a complex without being aware of its constituents is not an easy question, but in the whole it would seem there's no reason why it should not be possible. So here's the self. Here's a relation, A is bigger than B. And can this, the question is, can you be acquainted with that whole relation, that whole complex, without being acquainted with A or B? And what's your feeling? Yeah, I mean, it seems to be pretty intuitive. Like, you look out at a room full of people, and you think, well, it's kind of a sea of faces. So I'm acquainted with this whole thing. You see what I mean? But that doesn't mean I have to be acquainted with everyone individually. I have to have singled out everyone individually. But then Russell goes on to say, we are acquainted with acquaintance. Okay, fasten your seatbelts. Right. We are acquainted with acquaintance, and we know that it is a relation. Okay, so it's not just that you're acquainted with the stuff around you. You're acquainted with your being acquainted with the stuff around you. Can you do that? Do that right now. Get acquainted with your acquaintances, your acquaintance relations. Also, we are acquainted with a complex in which we perceive that acquaintance is the relating relation. So it's just like this situation. It's just like this situation where the self is related to A being bigger than B, except that the self is related to the self being acquainted with B. Right? So we're acquainted with a complex in which we perceive that acquaintance is the relating relation, so you're getting it that acquaintance is the relating relation. Hence, we know that this complex must have a constituent with which we are acquainted. So he's claiming now, he's now backtracking on this thing. There's no reason why it should not be possible. He's saying, well, you're acquainted with the complex, you must be acquainted with the constituents. Yep. So we know this complex must have a constituent with which we're acquainted, i.e. it must have a subject term as well as an object term. This subject term, that's what I is. That's how you know what I means. You're acquainted with yourself as the thing that's acquainted with all that other stuff. Yeah? So, this is you being acquainted with an external patch. You are acquainted with this whole complex. Therefore, you're acquainted with the self. And when you say I, that's what you mean. That sounds right? Yep.
I got the impression from the reading that Russell wasn't really completely comfortable with this picture.
I absolutely agree. He's extremely uncomfortable with it. He says, thus, I means the subject term in awarenesses of which I'm aware. Well, that's what you mean when you say I. But as a definition, this cannot be regarded as a happy effort, and then he more or less puts it aside. But why is it not happy? I mean, what do you think? Should he have tried to be happy? Yeah. I guess it does, yeah, because you're acquainted with this complex, and presumably if you're acquainted with this complex, you should be acquainted with you being acquainted with this complex. Yeah, once you've let in acquaintance with acquaintance, why not acquaintance with acquaintance with acquaintance? And acquaintance with acquaintance with acquaintance with yeah.
Are these the same selves, or are they different?
It's the same self, that's the whole point, it's the same self, yeah. This is a little bit dizzying. But we already come across the reason why this seems not happy, this thing. This came up in a much earlier class, I think. God, it seems like it is a long time ago. It's a couple of months ago. Here's Harman saying, when you see a tree, if you're looking at a tree, you do not experience any features as intrinsic features of your experience. If you look at a tree and turn your attention to the intrinsic features of your visual experience, the only features there to turn your attention to will be features of the presented tree. So partly that's saying again what I was saying, bouncing off the phosphene, right? That the only way you can describe what's going on in your experience is describing the characteristics of the tree. But the point is, there's also no more to describe than that. There's no relation to yourself to describe in describing the experience. And it's not as if you yourself are somehow always there, that guy who's always around. You know, you see what I mean? You're not in there. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm not sure that like if you had somehow that eye distance to the higher spectrum, it wouldn't look pink.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right.
So how come, why is the color of coffee and tea not instead of like
Yeah.
the wavelengths that are coming out in the coffee?
Yeah, I guess the problem I have with that kind of picture, I mean, that's a very popular picture, yes. I mean, that's, I think probably most intelligent adults today regard that as, most educated adults today regard that as kind of obvious. I think it actually doesn't make sense because if you ask, what is this thing in the head? What am I talking about? The basic problem is you have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, you don't mean literally that there's something red in your head. Yeah? So
So like,
the-
you're trying to focus on the intrinsic characteristics of the visual experience rather than getting the visual experience because those are the intrinsic
Yeah.
characteristics of the pink. If pink was an intrinsic feature of the visual experience, you're already focusing on it. Like,
Right.
there's nothing else to focus on.
Yeah.
Kind of makes sound especially something that.
Well, the question is what concept of pink are we talking about? We have the ordinary English colour words. Yeah, that's a vocabulary that applies to external objects. We talk about
That's
paint.
what I'm telling you. I'm not sure that actually.
Okay, well, wait just a second. When we're talking about the colours of external objects ordinarily, we're talking about things you can paint. You're talking about things that you can change the colours of, that you can ask someone else to take a look at this colour. Yeah, we talk about them in ordinary English. I mean, I think that's just a kind of obvious fact that in ordinary English we talk about colours as if they're external properties of objects. Yeah. Well, now ask, I mean, the thing is, when people talk about the stuff inside the head, they're usually very careful to say, of course I don't mean that anything inside the head is literally red. You know, you open up the head, where's the red stuff? There's nothing red there. The brain is a kind of greyish. It's not like you're some kind of little thing in there that really is red. It's not to just strike you as red, it really is red, the thing in your head. That's not what you mean.
That's not my.
Right. And so you say, well, I don't mean that there's anything in the head that's really red. And then you think, well, what do I mean? And you say, well, it's kind of like red, but it's not actually red. It's something else. And at that point, you have actually no way of explaining what you are talking about. And probably the most currently popular way of talking about that kind of notion is in terms of Bloch's idea of mental paint. So there's kind of mental paint that is sprayed on your experiences, yeah? But if you ask, well, what are the varieties of mental paint? You know, do you have hint of pink and tangerine red or no, you don't get those varieties of mental paint. You have no way of saying what you're talking about when you're trying to describe the stuff inside the head. That is actually currently why the current mind-body problem is so extremely difficult, because people are trying to frame it when they don't even have a coherent vocabulary to say what they're talking about. This red in the head. What in the world is that? Nothing deeper than what? No, I agree with the lack of a need for explanations. I say the tree is the colour it seems to be. Right? I don't explain that at all. But what's a fake is to say, oh, I've got an explanation of that. It's something projected from your head. And then I say, okay, tell me about the projection apparatus. And all I get is, well, it's not really red, of course, because there's nothing red in your head, nothing relevantly red in your head. Yeah, and then you say, well, what is it? Well, I don't know. Future cognitive neuroscience will tell us that. Yep.
Is this why Russell wants to reject the view that there's this idea that's mediates experience?
That's part of it. Yeah. That's right. The idea would be something we couldn't get beyond, but we actually are already onto the external world itself in ordinary experience. What I'm raising here, though, is the reason why he's not happy with that definition of I. We had this quote from Moore earlier. In general, that which makes the sensation of blue a mental fact seems to escape us. It seems, if I may use a metaphor, to be transparent. We look through it and see nothing but the blue. So you remember this diagram? This is Moore's way of thinking about acquaintance. That the self is acquainted only with the external object. You are not acquainted with acquaintance. That actually makes no sense. That's what Moore is saying. When you try and focus on this, your gaze always slips through and hits the object. And you can try that right now. If you try, you're acquainted with the screen. Okay, trying to focus on your being acquainted with your acquaintance with the screen. And the Moore prediction is, no, do it now. This is not like pushing your eyeball. There's no danger. I mean, try and focus on your acquaintance with the screen. All you get is the screen. Your gaze slips through and gets onto the external object. So you're not acquainted with that.
It's like you can't see seeing.
Exactly. That's right. You can't see. It's the same thing. You can't see seeing. Yeah. When we refer to introspection and try to discover what the sensation of blue is, it's very easy to suppose that we have before us only a single term. The term blue is easy enough to distinguish, so it's easy enough to get onto the colour at the other end of your experience. But that's not the mental fact. The blue is not a mental fact. The mental fact is you being related to the colour. The term blue is easy enough to distinguish, but the element which I've called consciousness, that which the sensation of blue has in common with the sensation of green, is extremely difficult. And in general, that which makes the sensation of blue a mental fact seems to escape us. So this is Moore really going against the tone of the last questions, because the tone of the last questions is blueness as such is something mental. When you focus on the blue, you're getting the mental thing. Yeah? Moore is saying, no, that's not the mental thing. That's a characteristic of the objects around you. The mental thing is the relation. And that you can't get just by trying to introspect on it. Yep.
Just to be sure, so this doesn't seem exactly related to Russell talking about working with yourself, because maybe you can or can't, maybe you can't experience like that.
That's right.
But the self is the thing on the other end of it.
That's right. But the picture was, remember, that you get onto the self by a kind of decomposition of the acquaintance relation between the self and the object. Yeah. So that's what I'm discussing.
They seem different. I mean, like, maybe the transparency about the relation is true, but I can still look at myself in the mirror, and then I can be on the
That's
other
right.
end, and then I can go straight through to myself.
Yes, right. That's right. You could certainly be acquainted with an object that is in fact yourself by looking in the mirror, and indeed that's the whole practical value of mirrors, right?
Yeah.
So that must be right. But that can't be quite the same thing as being acquainted with the self, because you can perfectly well see yourself in a mirror and say, who is that talkative guy in the jersey, right? God, I sympathise with his plight. Yeah, and you just not realise it's you. So you're acquainted with the thing that is in fact yourself, but not acquainted with the self,
So,
right?
okay, then it just seems like the standards for being acquainted with yourself are being set very high.
Well, that's right. They're being set high. It's not just being acquainted with yourself one way or another. Yeah, it's what Russell's playing with is the idea that you get the self as a locus of all these acquaintance relations. The trouble is We're getting it from Moore that you're not acquainted with your acquaintance relations, you're not acquainted with the self properly, you're just acquainted with the external object. You get knowledge only of the external object from experience. Yep.
It seems that you're aware of yourself reflectively and not at the moment. I mean,
That's right. The reflexive thing is the hard thing to catch. What does it mean, reflexive?
you're aware afterwards that you were there.
That it was you. Yeah, I mean, there was that thing of Mach's about being in a bus late at night and catching sight of someone in a mirror and saying, "Who is that shabby pedagogue?" And you only later realize, oh God. Right. So that's the reflexive thing, but the hard thing is to catch what it means. And Russell was suggesting you get it as the locus of all these acquaintance relations. But Moore's point is right, you don't get the acquaintance relations at all. The real puzzle this raises is, I think what this is suggesting is that Russell was right not to be happy with the idea of acquaintance with the self. And that Moore's right to think, well, you only get the external world in perceptual experience. But then there are two really basic problems. One is, how do you know about your own existence at all? And the other one is, how do you even know whether you're conscious? Because with consciousness, if consciousness is this, if consciousness is the tube, right, it's by knowing about this that you'd know that you're conscious. But all you get is the stuff out there. How do you know that that's even there? How do you know that you're conscious? I mean, I try to figure out whether I'm conscious. I look around the room, I just see a whole bunch of other people. All right, so there's a whole bunch of other people. How does that mean I'm conscious? It doesn't mean I'm conscious. You guys could all be here whether or not I was conscious. Yeah? So if experience is only giving me the stuff out there, it can't tell me whether I'm conscious. And when I introspect, I don't get the experience, I just get the stuff. So you don't have a way of finding out whether you're conscious. All you have is a way of finding out about is the stuff out there in the world around you. And you don't have a way of getting this reflexive self-knowledge. All you can have is the knowledge that you might get just by looking in a mirror that doesn't tell you whether it's you or not. What you would really want to know is, I, the one who is encountering all these people, I exist. But how do you know that? I mean, what we've just agreed, or what I've just agreed anyway, is that you don't find out about the acquaintance relations with the world. You don't get this complex of being acquainted with yourself, being acquainted with the object. Right? You don't get that kind of hierarchy of acquaintances with acquaintance in ordinary experience. All you get is the stuff out there. That doesn't include you. Yep.
But this prototype theory, like, sort of addresses this whole thing, like, oh, like, you don't have, you're not going to describe what, like, mental experience, like, what food is, that example. But they are certain foods that are whole foods us. When we say that's a food, but when you have that mental experience and thinking of the food, like, certain foods are more food to us than other foods. You know what I mean? Like, just say that there's not a hierarchy, but isn't there a hierarchy?
Of acquaintances with acquaintances. Well, I can't do it myself. I'm sorry, I missed some of what you said, so please just repeat some of the but let me just say, the idea is, to be acquainted with this would be to have a tube connecting to this, between, a tube that went like this, between me and it, between me and this one, yeah? And then another tube connecting to that tube. Yeah, that's what I mean by the hierarchy. But in all of these cases, you don't get any awareness of the relation from the exercise. All you get is more awareness of the outside world. That's what I mean. The thing is, you can try that now. All you wind up doing is staring very hard at the people around you. But forgive me if I'm just missing your point. Come back.
But like, okay, prototype theory is like, for example, like, all foods are not the same foods.
Oh, what are not the same? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just... Birds, yes, right, thank you. Yeah.
Right, like, we are more likely to say, like, a robin is more coded than a bullet.
Yes, right, absolutely. Yes, yes, very good. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you don't, when you feel like, oh, you don't have to move like reading behind something, this is really how you want to feel about. I was trying to more.
Yes, I strongly agree with that. I strongly agree with that. There is certainly, I agree that there are kind of canonical blues and blues where you say that's not what I'd call blue, that's kind of turquoise or something. That's what you mean. Yeah, I agree with that. That's a hierarchy in what's at the end here, yeah, and how you classify it. But I mean, suppose you had birds on the end here, yeah, then you would have a hierarchy. You'd have your canonical birds, and you'd have these strange-looking ones, and you say that's not what they call a bird, or whatever. But none of that is helping you get onto consciousness itself. This is talking. It's all talking about what's in the other end of the relation here. It's not allowing you to get onto whether you're conscious of all that stuff. It's telling you about all the fauna that there are out there. It's not telling you about whether you're conscious of all the fauna. So far as your experience itself goes, your experience itself tells you nothing about whether you are experiencing all these things. That's the whole point. Okay, can you do it as a sound bite? 1, 2, 3, and
Okay, just one quick one on that. When you say, you're aware of everything around you, it's a loaded issue because you're aware of everything around you consciously from a point of view. We can assume that the world doesn't have a point of view. So, a point of view
That's right.
nowhere. So, in other words, I see a pole between consciousness as a principle of abstraction.
Yeah.
And absolutely depends upon content in order to, you can only see it by inference.
By inference, okay. That's the peculiar thing, right? I mean, I agree it's very natural, that notion of the point of view from which the scene is observed. But the trouble with it is that in the face of it, if you think of that kind of a perspective picture, yeah, and the vanishing point from which it's viewed, the vanishing point is not itself something that's being represented in the picture. It's not something that you're able to talk about. It's not one of the objects in the scene. And then you say, well, what is it? And you say, well, I know about it by inference. I think there must be such a thing there. I wonder what it's like. Well, that wasn't what we hoped for from the self. We thought the self was the first and most immediate thing you were given. Yeah? Yeah.
Is this truth hierarchy not the same thing as being aware that you have a tendency to experience things in the outside world? Like
Not being aware.
like I'm aware that next time I see a blue
Yeah.
paper, I'm going to have a relation to it. That's not one step removed. That's not the connection to it.
That would be a piece of high theory. You could say, well, I've read Russell, so I think I probably am related by relations of acquaintance, but you don't know it from your own experience. So then there's a question how you can recognize the correctness of Russell's characterization at all. Because it's not like you observed it in particular cases. You didn't observe it in particular cases. All you observed in particular cases were the external objects. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was thinking that it might be the glass piece that's
Yeah.
seeing the glass.
Very good. Yeah. There's a lot to say about that. It's a great idea that this is not, after all, a simple glass tube. If I see a spider and I want to run for the hills, then fearfulness enters into the relation of consciousness itself, something like that. And couldn't you do some work with that to explain where the notion of the self comes from? Yeah, I'm actually very sympathetic to that. We have to wrap up in just a second, but I want to just connect this back to Descartes. Descartes' idea was, what goes on is that you have a particular conscious thinking, and then you conclude from that, I'm thinking, and then you conclude from that, I exist. Right? That was a cogito. I mean, most of you have come across this at some point. Yeah. Now, you think about this from the point of view of the theory of reference. The way he's thinking about a particular conscious thinking is, it's as if there was in the scene a kind of glowing fog. Right? That's you thinking. And you encounter that glowing fog, and you say, that one there, that's me. That's how I pull out the self from the scene, the one with the glowing fog, right? And that's a bit like Russell's idea. You know, if you're acquainted with your acquaintance relations, you kind of pick yourself out like that. But I don't think that's at all plausible as an account of self-reflexive self-knowledge, because you're the one that is observing the glowing fog. You're not the glowing fog itself. If you could really point to something like that, then the question, but is that me, makes perfect sense. It makes just as much sense as looking at the pedagogue in the mirror and saying, but is that one me? You could similarly point to that locus of thinking and say, well, I see that there's somebody there. I wonder if it's me. So that's not actually the way we usually think about the self. And in fact, what's going on here seems to be this. You know about your own existence. You know who you are. And given that you've got a particular conscious thinking, you can conclude from that, hey, that's me. I'm thinking. Yeah? Given that you have this background knowledge of your own existence, that's not how you prove your knowledge of your own existence. Descartes' cogito just presupposes a thinker that knows of their own existence. And then they find themselves thinking, and they say, hey, I'm thinking. Well done, you know. Keep at it. But it's just a fake to say, and therefore I know I exist. The whole thing only works because you plugged in knowledge of your own existence to start with. In the trade, this is called transmission failure. But then the question how you have knowledge of your own existence is still as puzzling as ever. And maybe the right conclusion is that you don't have knowledge of your own existence or whether you're conscious. And on that bombshell, we really will end for the term. This has been a fantastic term. I really appreciate you guys' seriousness and staying power on this long, long course. So thank you. It's been a pleasure to go through this. Good luck at the exam.